You walk into a Rolex boutique. You have the money. You know exactly which model you want. And you still walk out empty-handed. Because at Rolex, money is only level 1. What actually matters is access. And the people who understand that play a completely different game. Level 1, the first Rolex. This is where almost everyone starts, usually with an Oyster Perpetual, a Datejust, or sometimes an older Submariner. At this level, the buyer isn't really purchasing a watch. They're purchasing entry into a world they've been looking at for years. For many people, Rolex is the first luxury item that feels universally understood. You don't need to explain it. Everyone already knows what it means, and Rolex knows this. That's why level 1 is built around availability. These watches are expensive, but still achievable. They create aspiration without feeling impossible. But here's the illusion. Most first-time buyers think getting a Rolex means they've entered the luxury world. In reality, they've only entered the waiting room. Because the moment someone buys their first Rolex, they immediately discover there are levels inside Rolex too. And suddenly, the Datejust that once felt impossible starts feeling basic. The watch that changed everything becomes the floor, not the ceiling. And that realization changes everything. That's how the system pulls people upward. Level 2, the sports models. This is where things become competitive. Submariners, GMT Masters, Sea Dwellers, Daytonas. These are the watches people actually fight over. And this is the level where buyers first encounter Rolex scarcity. A steel Daytona doesn't cost absurd amounts because of materials. It costs absurd amounts because Rolex has mastered controlled demand better than almost any luxury brand on earth. Rolex doesn't overproduce. They never flood the market. Every piece released is calculated. Every shortage is intentional. The wait list isn't a problem, it's the product. At this level, buyers start learning a strange truth about luxury. The harder something is to get, the more people want it. Not because they need it, because other people can't have it. The market knows this. The collector knows this. And the first-time buyer is about to learn it the hard way. And Rolex turns this psychology into an economy. Suddenly people are building relationships with authorized dealers, buying watches they don't even want, visiting boutiques regularly, sending gifts, hoping to get the call, because now ownership isn't enough. Allocation becomes status. LX. On screen, it's no longer about what you can afford. It's about whether they'll let you have it. Level 3, the quiet wealth Rolex. This is where Rolex becomes dangerous, because level 3 owners stop buying watches for attention. They buy watches for recognition from other wealthy people. This is the world of the sky dweller, the white gold Daytona. Vintage references most people wouldn't even recognize. To normal people, these watches often look almost identical to cheaper Rolex models. But inside luxury circles, they communicate something completely different. Knowledge, access, history. At this level, the watch becomes a password. A signal sent only to those who already know the code. Strangers walk past it without a second glance. But the right person in the right room notices immediately. This is where Rolex starts behaving less like fashion and more like a secret language, because real luxury rarely screams. Level 4, vintage collectors. At this level, modern Rolex starts becoming less interesting. Now buyers want watches with stories. Paul Newman Daytonas, ghost bezels, tropical dials, rare production mistakes, and suddenly, flaws become valuable. A faded dial that would ruin a normal watch can increase a vintage Rolex's value by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Because collectors aren't buying perfection anymore. They're buying uniqueness. And uniqueness is the rarest luxury of all. This is also where the market becomes deeply irrational to outsiders. Two watches that look almost identical on the surface can differ in value by millions, because one has provenance. One has history that can never be replicated, and the other is just a watch. Most people spend their whole lives chasing perfection. Vintage Rolex collectors figured out something different. Imperfection, when it's rare enough, becomes the most perfect thing in the room. Because now the owner isn't flexing money, they're flexing taste. And taste is much harder to copy. Level 5, the relationship economy. This is where Rolex ownership stops being transactional. At level 5, your purchase history matters more than your wallet. Authorized dealers begin tracking who gets access to certain pieces. VIP clients receive private calls before watches are publicly available. And suddenly, Rolex starts looking less like retail and more like a private club. This is why two people can walk into the same store with the same amount of money and receive completely different treatment. One is a customer, the other is an asset, because luxury brands don't just sell products, they manage ecosystems. The wealthiest clients aren't chasing watches anymore, they're being offered them. There's a fundamental difference between those two positions. One requires effort, the other requires trust. And trust takes years to build inside these walls. The watch was never the difficult part. The relationship was. Level 6. The invisible collectors. Most people never see this level. These are collectors whose collections rarely appear online. People who own vaults instead of watch boxes, family offices, billionaires, royal families. At this level, watches stop functioning as accessories. They become financial instruments. Some collections are worth more than mansions, and the strange part is, many of these owners barely wear them. Because at this level, Rolex becomes less about ownership and more about preservation. These watches move between private dealers, auction houses, and collectors quietly behind closed doors. No Instagram posts, no flexing, no YouTube wrist shots. Just quiet movement of rare assets between people who already exist inside the system. At this level, the watch has fully detached from the wrist. It lives in a climate-controlled vault. It travels in a secured case. Its value compounds quietly over decades. Like real estate, like art, like anything the ultra-wealthy use to store value across generations. Level 7. The crown above the crown. This is the level the public almost never understands, because the highest level of Rolex ownership has nothing to do with Rolex itself. It's about what Rolex signals. At the highest levels of wealth, people stop using luxury to impress strangers. Instead, luxury becomes a filtering mechanism, a way to identify who belongs inside certain rooms. And Rolex mastered this better than almost any company on earth. Because the ultimate Rolex flex isn't owning the most expensive watch. It's being offered one the public can't get. At this level, the watch on your wrist isn't a purchase. It's a credential. It tells the room who you are before you say a single word. It opens doors that money alone cannot open. And the people who matter already understand exactly what it means. That's why Rolex became more than a watch brand. It became a social infrastructure. A system built around scarcity, access, and silent recognition. The brand doesn't advertise this. They don't need to. The system runs itself, because once someone enters, they never fully leave. And once you understand that, the watches start making a lot more sense. Because in the world of Rolex, the watch was never the real product. Access was.